Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, whatever time of day it is, and whatever day it is. I want to thank you for listening to another episode of AJH Politics. I'm Eric Herman. I'm the Libertarian candidate for Shawnee County Commission, District 1 here in Kansas, and I'm also your host here. This is episode 18, I want to say, here for the 2026 calendar year. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the Shawnee County Commission's budget hearings that were a few weeks ago. Um, for the upcoming 2027 year. And so let me just cut to the chase right now on it. You're looking at roughly a 3 to 5% increase in the budget, and that is basically more or less based off of personnel getting raises. And if you want to stop watching the video right now, that's basically the gist of it. Now, that isn't to say there isn't other infrastructure stuff and things like that I'm going to kind of ramble on now at this point. But I wanted to make this video. I talked about that earlier. And starting next week, I'm going to get back into doing some of the regular Monday, Thursday session reviews. I'm just kind of went back to do that session. I got busy with life and other things, we'll just say. And so yeah. Um, so let's go into some of the bigger weeds on it. I guess before I do that, I just want to say I called it. It was a few sessions prior to these sessions that occurred, I think, in July 20th. So today is August 11th. So it's been a while, but fairly recently. But probably it's been in the last 8 weeks where there was a meeting and everyone got raises. The county commissioners gave themselves raises. All of their department heads got raises. All of the personnel's got their raises. All of the union members, the non-union members, all that sort of stuff. And I appreciate that inflation is a bitch, and I appreciate that most people inherently deserve some level of annual raise. But I've also been in a situation where times are tough, and sometimes raise freezes and hiring freezes are just the way a business operates. But I guess I don't know. I will say this: they did it as a presentation. There was no voting or anything like on it. So I'm going to try to get started as best as I can on my notes. I'll just flip this over. You probably can't see it. Maybe you can. I mean, my notes are terrible, but there's like a good top half. The ink evaporates in my hot car, so I can kind of, if I hold it at the right angle, I can kind of make out some stuff. But one thing that was kind of interesting out of this is you at least got to kind of see all the different department heads talk about things. So you actually, how many departments actually exist? So we'll start with the DA. Each lawyer handles 435 cases a year. And they have 3 vacancies. And I think I see something on here about an 8% increase. The next thing they talked about were the courts. I'm trying to see this stuff. The Department of Corrections, they did have a fairly high budget increase, over 9%, and some of that stuff was infrastructure based, which, if you've been paying attention to any of my videos or the Shawnee County's videos, they've had plenty of stuff where they talk about leaking pipes and broken driveways that need to get repaired. And the county commissioners actually have paperwork that they're looking at. And you do see some of the PDF stuff on it that I thought about clipping out, but now that I've already lost half of my notes, it's just kind of a pain in that regard. Like I said, long story short, raises. That's what it boils down to. But the Department of Corrections, they did have a kind of a hefty increase in terms of what they were asking for. And a lot of that is, some of it's even like state mandated stuff about, I don't remember off the top of the head, but if the state said that, like you need to replace old lead pipes with copper pipes, now you got to do it. Or other mental health services, things that you're kind of like, okay, like I understand you're talking about prisoners, but be them already found guilty or in trial still or whatever, that you're kind of like, I get it. Let's see here. After the Department of Corrections, the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office talked about crime going down for a while. It is kind of interesting how some of the departments basically just talked about numbers, and they were just like, hey, this is what's up, blah blah blah. And then there are other ones that came up there and they just did this very like long-winded emotional spiel about how awesome they are, and then proceeded to tell them how much money they needed, which I don't know. The sheriff's department did talk about some of their stuff, as well as plenty of the other offices. Although I will say, it did feel like some of the offices, like the Officer of Deeds, if I recall, while they did kind of talk about some of the upgrades that they wanted, they were very, they felt like they were a lot more matter of fact than the Safe Streets program. But going back to the sheriff's office, who also kind of like, they talked about drones and also and how they're preventing crime and stuff like that. And first off, I don't think they're preventing crime. Just because the amount of arrests that you have made has been going down doesn't mean that crime has been going down. People might just be getting away with it. And I understand that there's a difference in terms of like finding dead bodies floating in the river or something to that effect, where you're like, clearly there's a crime. But if somebody makes fentanyl and sells fentanyl, and then the person uses fentanyl and nobody else knows about it except for those two persons, call me a libertarian, where's the crime, right? Like, and that was another thing that the sheriff talked about, which is just, in my opinion, slightly terrifying, is that he's talking about like, yo, we could hire, 1,000 more police. There's so much just drugs and narcotics, like what he called hard drugs, out on the streets, which again, libertarian ideas are you legalize drugs because these laws don't stop crime. They just define crime. And you just think about how much tax dollars are going into the drugs. He even talked about, I guess back in the day, they had a helicopter. They don't have a helicopter anymore, but they had the money for it. They'd want to have a helicopter circling above all these SWAT cameras and things like that. I mean, these, it's always sold as doing good for the community. And sometimes I also think about like, I don't know. I'm really going on a rant about the sheriffs, and that was not what I meant to be doing on this video. I just wanted to present numbers, but I do think of like Andy Griffith, and I think of some of these other libertarian memes of like, like, hey, you're having a heart attack, you call the ambulance. It's not like the ambulance just comes to your house and be like, oh, are you eating too much sugar? Or you call a fireman, you know what I mean? Like, oh, did you remember to have a fire extinguisher next to your barbecue? You're like, no, you call them when there's an emergency. And yet you think about the police, I don't know, pulling you over for traffic stops, or just like, oh, what's that funny smell coming from over there? Let me go, like, just harassing people, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of the police department. You got to go out there and solve murders and rapists, and yeah, absolutely. But there's other things that I don't think are very criminal in nature, and regardless of what the law says. But anyway, yeah. They also did ask for money again. Now this is something. So let's talk about it. The radios in their cars need to be upgraded per some new law handed out by the state. And that's fine in terms of needing the money for that. And throughout all of this money needing, the commissioners did talk to some of them about state or federal grants about that, which is basically saying you use tax dollars to pay for the money that the laws. It's just that it's not local tax dollars. It's that you're getting tax dollars from somebody else, which is still theft. It's still stealing, and it's still wrong. It's just the way the game gets played. But I will say that I just get so annoyed when a higher power, like a state or a federal, demands something happen, but then they don't fund it. It's not okay for Washington, D.C. to tell Kansas what Kansas has to do and then have Kansas foot the bill. Any more than it is for Kansas to tell Shawnee County how to do its job and tell Shawnee County that it's got to foot its bill. So anyway, let's move past the sheriff and into emergency services, which at first I was like, what the heck is emergency services? Because to me, when I think of 911, like you can either be getting shot at and calling 911, you could be having a heart attack and be calling 911, you could be having a fire and be calling 911, right? But suffice to say, the emergency services is more of the ambulance and the fire department, and then the police department or the sheriff's department is something else. And again, that is the sheriff department, not the Topeka police department. And yeah, they talked about, stuff. I think they actually asked for less than 1% increase. I wrote down $667,000 in salary. So at least I can see my notes. Let's get into this next department called Safe Streets / Prevention and Resilience Services. Okay, here's a department that I would just basically fire everyone for immediately, and just do away with the entire department. I don't know if I can legally do that. Like I said, this might be required by the state, but I do not believe in this at all. Basically, what this is, and also their presentation, I went through it. I don't think a number was ever stated. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't a handout that the county commissioners had where they got to see this budget. Nothing on the audio's transcript in terms of YouTube about whatever's going on in terms of how much money is actually getting spent on this program. But basically, what this program is apparently these people walk around in these neighborhoods and knock on people's doors and hang out on their porch and talk to them about their problems, and that's beautiful in terms of neighbors meeting neighbors and having some difficult conversations about maybe some needs. It sounded like something that's happening a little bit more in low income areas. Um, I do not know how many specific neighborhoods there are in the city of Topeka. They did mention that there are 11 neighborhoods, which are mostly in what they call Central and North Topeka, and they're looking to expand in two more. But one of the commissioners asked, is like, are you guys even in Silver Lake, which is another city here in Shawnee County? And no, I mean, so just think of all the money that Silver Lake residents are going to pay for somebody to get paid. They're not volunteering to do this stuff. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that you want to be a community leader, church leaders or community leaders, or people in business that are like, oh hey, like I run the burger joint down the way. I'd love for you to buy my burgers, but I also would love for this to be like a safe and healthy community where people can walk to my burger shop at 11 p.m. and buy my burgers, right? um, voluntary efforts. That's something that libertarians believe in. And instead, we've got somebody getting paid to go out there and do what is inherently a nice service, but just the thought of taxpayer money going to that to have conversations. That's it. That's all they're doing. Like there's no road you can drive on for it. There's no policeman that's on the street, if that's what you want to that you're seeing out of it. So anyway, whatever. Let's move on. Stormont Vale Center, I guess, is a department. I didn't really understand that. I know we've talked about the Stormont. I didn't know it is exactly fully owned and operated by the county. They had a pretty big increase, 15.68%. Now, part of that is some renovations in the infrastructure of the Stormont. They estimated an extra $1.3 million generated in revenue by creating more, what do they call it? High price ticket areas. So private booths, or like some of the other, what do you call it? I can't think of it off the top of my head, but you go to, see the basketball game or whatever, the hockey game, and they've got those expensive ones along the ring there compared to where I like to sit, and that's fine. That is definitely infrastructure that generates revenue. The county fair is its own department. They talked about needing more money, mostly because they need more tables. I think they were renting the tables or something. They talked about renting tables. They were getting tables from Stormont. But then, the old tables were getting thrown away, and then they need electric stuff for hookups. Definitely, they need tables, it sounds like, and they're going to try to figure out if it's better to buy them or rent them. It's kind of ironic that if you think about a table getting so used and abused that it gets thrown away, that why aren't you replacing it? Or having a heads up on it. You're just like, apparently we're not going to have tables anymore. And that's, like I said, when they go back to the sheriff's department, and when we get into sanitation and stuff like that, vehicle maintenance, that's a huge thing. Parks and Rec, which is probably the biggest guys, they went from 19.2 million to 19.9 million. Like I said, more or less salaries. All these departments started talking about utilities, just the operating cost of water, electricity, sewer, trash. Everything has gone up. Inflation and utility rates the utility rates are going up, and inflation. And so it's all eating into everyone's overhead. The appraiser's office, a small increase from 2.4 to 2.5 million. That's all I have written down. Don't remember much else about what that guy said, other than the fact that personally, I get annoyed at the appraiser's office because of this whole property tax fiasco. It's something I could complain about. I've already complained enough about the sheriff's office. Register of Deeds. This is a department. They asked for some money for some personal development, and they asked for some money for upgrading the security system. Public Works, that went from 10.3 million to 11.2 million, and they had that broken down where 6.1 million. Wait, is that right? 6.1 to 6.3 million was salary. 4.2 to 4.9 million is non-salary. Now, non-public works is basically probably your water, your sewer, fixing the potholes, salting the roads during winter, all that sort of stuff. And the guy that was doing the presentation, which personally I just absolutely loved, was showing some of this stuff where basically when it comes to that $11.2 million budget, 43.8%, that's less than a majority. Less than a majority of that budget actually goes into fixing the roads and getting you hot water or fresh water and all that sort of stuff. The rest of it just goes into paying the people that kind of overhead run that. And obviously, there's going to be some level of overhead. But he went back to like previous years, like 10 years ago, and where it was more than 50%. Where it's like, if you're going to pay money to public works, let that money actually go into the public works. As someone who's kind of personally tangential to that, given that I work for a civil engineering firm, and we do civil engineering, road and other and freshwater and sanitary projects for the city of Topeka. Some of that money is inherently basically going to me, even though I work at a private company. So I want to be, one, honest about that, but two, the idea is that the tax dollars need to go to providing the goods and services. They do not need to go to be creating jobs, because goods and services require jobs. You can always create jobs. And if you don't understand that, understand Milton Friedman and just using a spoon to dig a ditch instead of shovels. And you use a backhoe instead of shovels. You know, like, are you trying to dig a ditch? Or are you trying to create jobs? So let's move on past public works. But I thought it was really interesting that he was displeased with how little of the public works money is actually going into the public works. Anyway, I say that maybe he thinks that the solution is more money. I think the solution is less people. But anyway, solid waste. So love this guy. His department takes 0 tax dollars, okay? Because you don't have to actually have the Shawnee County Garbage Company. There's other private garbage companies that you can sign up for. So they operate with nothing but pure revenue. And so they generate $20.4 million is how much money they are projected to generate, of which they plan on spending $19.9 million of those dollars. And so the other $0.5 million goes into just the general fund. So other departments can use that money. They're literally making money for the county outside of taxes. I mean, somebody needs to take away the trash and you pay them to. So, and you can voluntarily choose which company you want to do it. Good for them. The weed department, not the cool weed department, but the weed department where they try to kill the weeds. I wrote down no money stated. They were looking to get 2 new positions and they needed more money for salaries. And they didn't really talk much about the whole obnoxious weeds things with honeysuckle, which I thought was going to come up in terms of them being given like the lengthy video I made about that in past about new laws making honeysuckle obnoxious weeds. So now you have to kill it. So now they need all this poison and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, the land use and development people, I have written down 33.4 thousand increase. Like I said, probably mostly just basically your annual raises for the people that work there. Then the election office spoke for a little bit. I have written down here $1.9 million, but $90,000 need to get spent on some sort of upgrade that the state mandated. So it was kind of a huge chunk of increase compared to like where things normally were. They also talked about how the budget for the election office is very cyclical over a 4 year period, where like your presidential years, like 2024, will be the highest year because they're going to need to hire some short term staff to deal with all the voting that's going to occur during a presidential election year. That's when people vote the most. That's where most of that sort of change your registration and all that and organization of all of that comes from. And then obviously 2026 would be your next heavy year. And then third place would be the odd years. It would be every 4 years, but the most recent one would have been last year, 2025. And that's because that's when the local Topeka mayor office is up for election. So the 2027 election is and that's the election happening in November of 2027. So that's in like what, 14, 15 months or something. And during that election cycle, we'll have, I think the even 2, 4, 6, and 8 out of the 9 total, 1 through 9. So just those 4, at least in the city of Topeka, for those offices, and then maybe some school board stuff. But suffice to say, yeah, there's this sort of like different stuff. And so the 2027 annual budget is the smaller bit of the pie. They did show a pretty cool pie chart where things were, it's not that there was ever this sliver piece. It was kind of like, oh, it's cut in 4 pieces, but clearly that's the biggest one and that's the smallest one. So anyway, that's my report on what the budget was about. Long story short, again, what they want is they want money for raises. And I already talked about it several episodes ago. I would absolutely put a wage increase. Now, I don't know if I can legally do that. Who knows what contracts people have, let alone union workers and crap like that. But these property taxes are getting ridiculous. And it's really not a state issue. It is a local issue. And elect me and let's get it solved. Stop spending the money.